today on an all-new Dr. Phil. Alex Murdaugh, guilty.
He paved his own road to the penitentiary.
The body language that gave him away.
Mouth grooming, rocks back and forth. There were so many red flags in the vehicle.
But we don't see any tears.
Did you notice him getting smaller? He's turning into a smaller target.
And this is an unconscious thing when people are under attack.
He exposes the top of his head. That's submission all day, every day.
Now, Scott says his approach is biological, and Greg looks for motivation. Now, together, they have been called a human lie detector. It's kind of scary to be around them, actually. On their YouTube channel, The Behavior Panel, they analyzed Alex's behavior on the stand and his first recorded interview in the police car the night of the murders. I want everybody to just stop and think for a second, particularly if you're a parent. Think just how demented you have to be to take guns down and shoot your spouse and your child in the chest and head with a shotgun, and their brains are laying out on the ground there. I mean, think about your own child for a minute and think about how far off you gotta be to do something like that. Okay, now you're in a car and you're talking about it, and you're already generating lies and alibis and working stuff out. You don't have any grief. You're not, that's not happening, right?
No, Doc, I'm a combat veteran. And when you happen up on somebody who's injured, never mind your family, you happen up on somebody who's injured in that way, it's horrific. And you have emotion, and all those emotions boil up. We don't see that. We don't see that. We see no grief muscle. We see no, his body language doesn't show it. He does the wail, and then his breathing comes back to normal. There's something wrong here. Right off, we saw it.
Yeah, and that happens immediately. And talk about this grief muscle, the inverted, talk about that a
Yeah,
little
so
bit.
Scott will always say, I'm the guy to do it because I can do it on demand, if you can see it on the camera. It's this little arch of muscles at the top of these concern muscles in your head. It's actually 5 muscles that come together. That term was coined by Darwin, oddly enough. But when we're showing pain, remorse, feelings of grief, that muscle hops out. All of you have seen it. If you think about people you see who are suffering, losing a loved one, you'll see that arch. It's up here like an upside down horseshoe there.
What behavior should we look for in this video we're getting ready to see?
First thing we look for are tears. This is supposed to be real emotion and real crying, but we don't see any tears. Let's pay attention to his blink rate, see what happens with that, and the way he breathes and his movements. The more fluid he would be, the more honest we would be under the impression he is. But the less he moves, the tighter he keeps his arms to his body and closer to himself, that's when we start going, something's not right here.
All right, let's take a look.
Start at the top, take your time.
I pulled up and I could see him, and you know, I knew something was bad. I ran out. I knew it was really bad. My boy over there, I could see it was.
I'm sorry.
And I could see his brain on his... And I ran over to Maggie, and his cell phone popped out of his pocket. I started to try to do something with it, thinking maybe, but then I put it back down really quickly. Then I went to my wife, and I mean, I could see.
Did you touch Maggie at all?
I did. I touched them both.
That transition from emotional to, I touched them both. Your kid is better than that.
Yeah, and this you commented on this, just no tears.
There's none.
At some point during this interview, when you were able to plan your lie about this event, and you made that decision.
Obviously,
but it wasn't what we just played. It wasn't yet. It was some point after that.
I don't think that's a lie right there. Is the reason why I don't think that it's occurred before this, because what I'm saying there, I believe to be truthful. And I know this. I know for a fact that when David Owens asked me about my relationship with my wife and my child, I know that that played a role in that. And I believe that, and I may be wrong, but I believe that this was before that.
You ever heard the expression, not telling the whole truth is the same as telling the lie?
Sure I have.
That's something you understood as a lawyer and a prosecutor?
Yes.
At the time, you weren't buying it.
No, it wasn't.
Did it just? What about it didn't ring true with you?
He just didn't come off true. I mean, when you look at him in his face and he doesn't cry, you know, I mean, it's just not true.
Vinny, you're watching this live at the time, right?
Absolutely.
What about it jumped out at you?
You know what I didn't understand? You know, he chose to have the trial where it was. Most high-profile cases we cover at Court TV, the defendants don't want to be anywhere near the scene of the murder. He wanted to be there. So as I watched him, I was wondering, does he think that he can convince these folks because maybe he's been doing it for years? You know, in terms of the clients that he's been cheating for years, his law partners, everyone's from down there. And he's been basically lying and cheating and committing fraud with a smile on his face.
You know, he sees it intuitively, and you guys saw a list of behaviors that from an expert standpoint jumped out. Give us a few of the big ones.
Well, one of the big ones is fading facts. When he starts hitting him on the details of that, as he speaks, he gets quieter and quieter as it goes along. The more uncomfortable you are with the answer, the less you want to go, it's this. You want to go, it's this. So you're more apt to start getting quieter. And he leans back just a touch if we'll look at that closely.
Okay. And what about him keep grabbing this mic and adjusting it?
Well,
neither of them were moving.
Right.
So
that's more of an adapter. He's trying to get rid of that built-up stress or tension, something to hang on to, something to grab onto to make him, to settle him down a little bit. If you'll notice, Craig, his hand's been doing this pretty much the whole time he's been here, but that we've been sitting up here because it's a big deal for him. But he's trying to get rid of some of that stress by rubbing on his hand a little bit like that. So Murdaugh is using that microphone, just something to do, anything to get rid of some of that energy that's building up, that stress, so it doesn't show when he's giving his answer.
What a great indicator to me that he's lying in places here is he lilts along and tells his story when it's prepared with a downward intonation. And then when he gets in a bind, his story starts to go, he starts to hesitate. And I'm sure you could feel it. You could tell when he's lying. This one, the reason we think it's the most powerful is we called out, long before he was on the stand, we called out the lie in the video when he decided to lie. There were so many red flags in the vehicle that we said, something has happened right here. And it was around whether he was there or not.
and what jumped out about?
Well, there's a place where they ask him, what was your relationship with Paul? And he goes, wonderful. And they said, what was your relationship with Maggie? And he goes, wonderful, and changes directions, tone, and blink rate. And so there we knew, this is a great example of why body language matters. The same words don't mean the same thing. Something is wrong between those two relationships. We don't know which, why. We just know there's a red flag.
And those are just red flags that give us a heads up to start asking questions more around what's happening with that.
Yeah, and there are like a couple of hundred indicators, and it's like whack-a-mole. You
Oh,
can't,
yeah.
you can't control them all, even if you know what they are.
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, it's worse, honestly, for us if we were trying to hide something. It is for you if you don't know, because you'll have a couple you think you're supposed to hide, and you'll get, there's one up there, you'll get overly polite. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, yes. You start getting too friendly. We go, hold on. Something's up.
You got out of the car, according to what you told law enforcement repeatedly, and went and checked the bodies, correct? Before you called 911, is that correct?
No, sir, that's not correct.
You're saying you didn't say that to law enforcement?
I don't know what I said to law enforcement, Mr. Waters, but I can tell you this. When I pulled up and I saw Mags and Paw, I jumped out of that car. I know that I went back to my car
and I called 911 as quickly as I could. That point in time, when I got on the phone, then is when I went to them and did the things that I did. So, what you're saying is not accurate.
You're saying that you didn't say very specifically to law enforcement that you went to them prior to calling 911.
When?
After you got out of the car, you told law enforcement repeatedly that you went over and checked the bodies before you called 911.
No, I don't. If I did say that, I don't believe that's accurate. Did I check Maggie and Paul before I called 911?
Correct.
No, sir. That's not accurate. At least that's not what I remember.
That's not what you remember saying, or that's not what you say now happened?
No, that's not what I believe happened.
If I played the second half of that for you and didn't tell you anything about what happened before that, and I said, what happened 15 seconds before that? You'd probably say nothing. Everything seems to be going very smoothly. He goes from this uncontrollable, trying to control his emotions and crying, to this thing where he's talking like we're talking now. Everything looks normal. That there almost is no transition between the sadness and then going back to what he's talking about. That is strange.
Let's make a list of stress indicators, because there are no indicators of deception, only stress that pile up, and we look for them. Mouth grooming. It means the mucous membranes in your mouth are drying out. When you're crying, that is not happening.
It's the most animated with his face and head we've seen so far.
He does that. He does what we call, in polygraphy, they talk about descending staircase breathing. Once you get to a point where you've been trying to control your breathing, you go, whoosh. He does that. His blink rate goes through the roof. As your eyes dry out from stress, your eyelids move more. So we see all those three things. He's adapting with the mic. And finally, he does something I call the chained elephant, as he rocks back and forth from one foot to the other, in this case, in a chair. All those are clusters. They all add together.
And I thought it was very interesting when he's on the stand. He doesn't just say, this is what happened. He goes, I believe, or I would have done this, or the data says. I mean, it's like he can't even speak for himself. He's trying to keep everything straight, and he just buffers everything. I thought it was interesting. At one point in that last clip, he's talking along, and all of a sudden he goes, when? When?
When?
And he looks right at the prosecutor. What was going on there? Because it looked like all of a sudden his animosity came out towards, he's just drilling right at that prosecutor.
Watch the prosecutor's body language. He's browbeating him, so there's some baggage between the two of them, clearly.
Yeah, Vinny, you were in the courtroom. What was his trial team doing while he was self-destructing like this on the witness stand?
Well, first, remember, it's always the defendant's decision whether or not to testify. My guess is from the beginning, they did not want this man to get up on the witness stand because they knew what could happen and what did, in fact, happen. They're picking moments here and there where they can jump in, but the way he was being questioned by prosecutors didn't give the defense any room to jump up and object about anything, because Creighton Waters picked a specific strategy for the cross-examination. It wasn't the Perry Mason, isn't it true, isn't it true, isn't it true? It wasn't that. It wasn't yes, no answers. He purposely asked him open-ended questions because he knew the more Alec Murdaugh spoke, the less credible he would be. And that is all playing out right now, as we can hear from the body language experts and the juror. Let the guy talk. This entire case was built upon the words of Alec Murdaugh. He paved his own road to the penitentiary.
Is that true? The more he talked, the worse it got?
It is.
About Alex Murdaugh, who now is in prison. Clearly appeals are coming, but in the meantime, he's in prison. Appeal is a long shot in a criminal case like this, particularly with a judge that ran that courtroom in a very careful manner. He crossed the T's and dotted the I's. So it's very unlikely that they're going to prevail on an appeal. So now he's in prison. Do you have a story or a question for me? Click the link in the description and tell me what in the world is going on.